the plenary discussion. I'm going to hand on now to Sanjana Hatatua. Sanjana.
Thank you. My perspective to this conference is from a field practitioner working in an active peace process, though it might not seem so when you read the news on Sri Lanka. For most of my adult life, I have been responding to emergencies. There has not been a single day in my life that I have been active in the field that I have not been responding to some form of emergency, to some form of crisis on the ground in the field. And my suggestion to you is quite obvious, is that innovation is going to happen whether we like it or not. It is all around us. We need not engender it. It's happening in the manner in which individuals, organizations, the world over, including OCHA, is responding to emergencies, be they humanitarian or complex socio-political emergencies, such as ethnic conflict. So innovation and social networking is occurring, is going to increase, and whether we like it or not, is going to influence all our lives into the future. Some of what I've been involved in Sri Lanka over the past number of years has been trying to channel some of this innovation and networking that's occurring to the response of emergencies, but more specifically geared towards a peace process in the country. Some of it has been planned. We, at the time, did an unprecedented exercise of bringing together in a collaborative, secure collaboration platform parties that were killing each other outside to discuss and deliberate ways in which a peace agreement could be thrashed out. And it's too long to go into the details of it, but this was a singular exercise in which warring factions, if one might call it that, came together to thrash out what was a blueprint for a final peace agreement. And the exercise still continues today, but obviously on a far more lesser important note. But most of it actually is unplanned, and we see this in the response to the mashups that we had after Katrina in terms of the Google Maps and the various locations of relief centers and places that you could go to. We've seen this in the Californian fires. Google Maps and various radio networks and news organizations have set up mashups where they now say the location of the fire and where you could go to, who you can call. So most of the innovation really is unplanned, and there's no way in which you can determine where that is going to occur and the manner in which it is going to occur. But the important thing is, speaking about last calls, after the tsunami on Boxing Day, which was after Christmas Day, when most of us, at least in Sri Lanka, were partying hard and partying late, most of us got the first calls in the morning of an event that we didn't know what it was, because the word tsunami obviously was not in our vocabulary. And I got a call from a friend who I didn't know, but at the time the call dropped, and I thought that was that. But it turned out that he passed away in that call, and what he was trying to suggest was to get out, because I also live near the sea. So it was quite traumatic for many of us, and I think what happened in my particular case was that I, in the period of 24 hours, managed to transform, at the time, what was a peace support network, a collaborative platform for peace support negotiations, into what was Sri Lanka's first relief information network. This was before Sahana and before the emergence of what is now quite a mature and interesting field called humanitarian FOSS. And so at the time, there were about 400 organizations, individuals, including the US government, Marines, CARE International, the UN system, who were all relying on this system to get the information first out in those critical hours after the tsunami. It wasn't nice, it was ad hoc, it crashed often, it was running out of my laptop mainly, and there are people in this audience who know and were part of that experience in Sri Lanka and in Indonesia. But the point was that it was innovation, but it was dealing with real lives. And I think that is what we are going to see as we move forward into the future as well. Innovation is going to happen. And I believe that it's about leveraging information. Information is already out there, and for the work that I do, my central challenge is getting the information in the form that is already out there into ways in which it can be really sustainable and useful in a timely manner for the purposes that, say, for human rights advocacy or for saving lives of people in the field. This could range from, saving a life of a person who's been abducted to a more sustained human rights advocacy campaign over the longer term. And part of the challenge is, it was suggested to me at a side event at the OCHA conference this time around, that interoperability is now a moot point. And even by a Herculean leap of imagination, if we accept that to be the case, as we move into the future, where mobility and mobile devices and any number of ways that information is going to be exponentially increased, I think it's going to be a huge challenge to manage that information and transform that into knowledge. And part of that is really technical, which can be addressed by programming and the tech and the geek side of things. But most of it is cultural. And that's a really tremendous problem to solve, because you're dealing with egos, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with organizations, you're dealing with cultural systems and frameworks and mechanisms that are not used to or don't want to share information, knowledge, or work together. And that's certainly, from a Sri Lankan perspective over the past decade, a tremendously difficult challenge. It's not really technical, but it's really the cultural things that Sami also averred to in his presentation. As we move into the future, let's say 3.5 billion mobile phones today, let's say we all have a mobile phone, everybody can be tracked, located, geotagged, we know what they are doing, we know where they are. So let's take that for granted. What are the ethics of this? How do we manage the ethics of being able to locate, monitor anyone, anywhere on the planet? And what do we then do with this information? How do we manage such a vast repository of information to prevent it from being used for harmful purposes? What are the manners in which ad hoc networks, just individuals or organizations in the field, who set up completely ad hoc ways of sharing information in a time of crisis, how then do we respond to that? And I see four major challenges there, or opportunities, depending on where you look at. One is obviously the civilian-military aspect. How do both interact with each other when the need arises? The other also is with local NGOs and international organs, international INGOs. The other is something that has been not really talked about. The field is not a homogenic entity. There are power relations in the field as well, and a lot of the organizations, even on the field, don't really share information in a coherent, sustainable manner. And finally, obviously, is the field to the headquarters. And I think these four areas are going to be really quite interesting in terms of the technology and the cultures as we move ahead. And it becomes fundamentally important in emergencies in particular to be aware of these four sectors. The other is, over the longer period of time, is to be aware of the governance frameworks in the countries and the regions we operate in. It's one thing to go into an emergency after it has occurred with the full force of the technical, financial and human resource power that OCHA and similar organizations bring. It is quite another to be embroiled in that context over the longer term, because then you have to deal with the politics of that region, country, state or nation. And the two are quite dissimilar. And the longer you stay in that region, the more embroiled and the more you have to respond to the singular politics, which actually might be quite against humanitarian work, as John Holmes suggested earlier, and certainly and sadly the case of Sri Lanka suggests to the rest of the world. Finally, I would like to mention that the ICT for Peace Foundation, which is partnering with OCHA in this exercise, believes that we need to transcend the local governance frameworks if we are to bring about a coherence in information sharing. And we've launched a process called ICT for Peace Crisis Management, that details of which are available on the Foundation website, that we hope will bring about or facilitate, along with the leadership of OCHA in this regard, a more coherent framework for information management and knowledge sharing, dealing with and answering all the challenges that are outlined as we move ahead into the future. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sanjana. Lots to pick up on that there, I think, in our discussions. But the points I take from that immediately are innovation is happening out there. It's already happening, planned or unplanned. You gave us the example of the Peace Support Network and its adaptation. You talked about the challenges of transforming knowledge, information into knowledge, and what those challenges consist on, the cultural barriers in particular, which I think link to our first presentation. And you